Welcome back to Proper Madness. I'm happy to have you back if you're a returning listener. If you're a new listener, my name is Sabby, and I have a very unique perspective on mental health. I believe wholeheartedly that we can turn anything that we have been through and alchemize it into bettering ourselves mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I also get to have the wonderful chance to speak to some amazing individuals, all very unique in their own stories from all around the world. They get to tell their lives, their stories, their hardships, and how they've overcome it. It helps you feel less alone, to know and understand that the way out is always through the eye of the storm, no matter how much we like to avoid it. Grab a cup of tea. If you're not a tea drinker, grab your coffee, and let's sit down and tune into ourselves so that we can learn to connect to other people. We never know the weight of our words and how they might help someone. Welcome back, everyone, to Proper Madness. Today I have a new friend with me, also from Twitter. This is my third Twitter friend on here. X, whatever it's called, I don't know. His name is Austin, and he's a wonderful man. We are really excited to talk today because he has a very interesting story. We have similar backgrounds and beliefs, and I think it'll be a really good conversation.
All right, thanks for the intro, Sabi. Yeah, I just got started on Twitter just to cover a little about my background. Just a few months ago, I was always somebody that wrote for myself and kind of shared ideas with people close to me. And decided to kind of take the leap and share them more publicly. And I went through some pretty significant events in the last year or so, and has I've garnered some insight that I think people can maybe benefit from. So
Yeah, that's good. What do you think? How have you felt being on Twitter just generally? Because there's like
sure,
mixed reviews about it, I think, for with a lot of people.
yeah, I have a tendency to be pretty blunt about my opinion about certain things. So I think it's good, but everything tends to venture towards an echo chamber eventually.
Mm.
And that I see that happening a lot, and I have to kind of remove myself to make sure I'm thinking for myself still. You start to, if you're sensitive enough, you'll start recognizing when you're picking up on other people's ideas and things feel less like yours, and so you just kind of step away. And I think that's with every type of platform like that. But
Mm.
I do appreciate that it's more intellectually driven, not visually driven, you
Yeah.
know. So I like that about it.
Yeah, this sounds very, I mean, whatever, but I think Instagram is very superficial, and the people that follow you there are literally just there to see what you look like visually half the time, or
Sure.
for visual content. I mean, like I guess people like me who like I make my tea time with savvy things like that
Right.
is something that's great for there. It doesn't always translate on X, right? Because no one's really looking
Right.
at stuff like that. But I do
Sure.
appreciate like as you're saying that it's a more intellectually driven place. I got into like a really interesting conversation actually last night with some friends. So it's funny that you said that, where people are saying that it is an echo chamber now, and they don't understand the reason behind being on a platform that seems to be so driven by like copy paste ideas,
Right.
where people are sort of taking one idea, and we talked about this, taking one idea of what someone else is posting, and it's not really their opinion anymore. It's like the exact same thing. And then they kind of become that person. It's almost like I don't know what that would be called in any sort of intellectual way, but I like that you said it's hard to get lost in that stream of just consciousness on Twitter and think,
Right.
"Oh, that's a really good thought." But then whatever you take from it, you gotta figure out, is it inspiration or is it just, are you copying what they're saying, you know? So,
It's difficult to navigate because a lot of books, even I mean, a famous one, 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, is just a compilation of other books.
mm,
And I forget what Ryan Holiday realized that, and he's like, "Wow, this book is just a compilation of other previous books." And really, that's what intellectualism is. It's just a compounding of ideas. And so to be original on a platform like Twitter, you have to appreciate that people are still going to do that. They're going to compound other people's ideas and put their own spin on them. But that also is what creates the echo chamber.
Mm.
So you'll see comments of what I think might be an original idea that I post, and comments that are just literal reiterations of exactly what I said.
Mhm.
And it's at some point you have to wonder what the hell anyone's doing other than
Yeah.
just copy and pasting, trying to collect, attention. Because it's just human nature to want to draw attention toward yourself, and it's the attention economy. So whatever the echo chamber is telling you is popular is what you'll want to do.
Mm.
It's hard to navigate, to know, because at the end of the day, what I want to feel like I'm doing is contributing, maybe not an original idea, but an original spin that is actionable.
Yeah.
I can post platitudes all day and people will talk about this, and they do really well.
Mhm.
People love the quick one or two lines so
Yeah.
they can repeat it and rephrase it. But at the end of the day, does it get anybody to do anything?
Mm.
And I think that's how you can stand out and maybe be authentic in a place that just breeds inauthenticity.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said with that, with everything that you said, right? Because we live in a world that is already like that, unfortunately, um,
Right.
where people are just kind of almost like they're mirrors of like the person next to them. Like the game telephone is what I'm imagining is like one
Absolutely.
person. Yeah, it's like you say one phrase, that's the original thought and idea or quality or personality. Someone likes it and they take it and they pass it around, and eventually that uniqueness, that authenticity just gets lost because no
Sure.
one's thinking for themselves,
No.
at all, ever. Most people just kinda take what they wanna hear sometimes, I think, on those platforms and go, "Okay, let me spin it however I wanna spin it," and then
Sure.
that's fine, that's, I think, a little bit different, but
It's the right now, it seems like everybody's talking about authenticity to the point where everybody has become inauthentic,
mm,
right? Like everybody's so concerned with standing out that they end up blending in. It's this, and we're going to the most inauthentic place that you can, the internet,
mhm,
to find authenticity. And then we think we find it, and it's just the same as everything else, I guess. And I don't know if there's any escape from that. I think
yeah,
it's kind of the world we built, because at the core of it, I think all humans are craving the same thing. So to be authentic is maybe to be like everyone else
mm,
at the core of it, and
yeah,
the only thing that makes you different is your upbringing and the unique experiences that you've had to bring out that sameness in a unique way.
mm,
Like we're all human. We're all trying to express the same thing, this plight of being alive. And how do we help each other deal with that plight, like the human experience is to suffer, so
yeah,
how do we help each other suffer a little less? And I think the answers are always the same, so maybe that's part of it too, is that we're all starting to find the same answers in a way, and they all start
yeah,
sounding the same. But then you know I think history repeats itself and will continue to. I don't
yeah,
know if you can get away from it. Like we just cycle through. And I don't know, stepping away, if you want to feel like you have an authentic, original idea, which you may never, because the subconscious holds all the things you read,
mm.
and so it might feel original, but it might just be an epiphany that came out of a book you read 20 years ago.
Oh, wow, yeah,
It, so, but maybe the whole idea is for it to feel original,
mm.
and so I step away from books and step away from videos and step away from Twitter and Instagram when I feel like I've I've not that I've kind of lost the feeling of being original, and I
That's
kind
really
of
smart,
block
yeah.
it out. Yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask you too, like, what are ways that you take time to step away from consumption? But I think it's just exactly like you just take time to reconnect to yourself. That's all you really have to do.
Yeah, you do. And we've talked about sensitivity as well. And like when
Mhm.
I feel like I'm veering off, I do get some somatic and like sensual response that you're not on, like you're maybe not on the right path. Like you can feel it in your bones that, you're starting to assimilate too much into what everybody else is. And so I think grounding, getting into your body, understanding what it's talking about, what the negative feelings mean, really spending time with yourself. And that was the biggest challenge I've had in hearing my own voice and hearing myself, has been to give myself time to slow down.
Mm.
This isn't a race to be won. There's no end goal. When you've reached the end goal, you're dead. That's
Yeah.
the end. So stop trying to push to a new mountaintop and think that it's the final mountaintop, you know.
Mm.
And so expand your time, expand the depth that you feel in each moment, and this, experience life and like let it flow a little bit. And understanding that has allowed me to slow down and afford myself the time to step away and not grind like everybody wants to
Yeah.
push for.
Yeah. The
I don't
rat
want to
race
spend my life
culture.
grinding.
No, it's not. It's exhausting and it's taxing on your nervous system. It's taxing on you spiritually. Like, and we were talking about this before we came on. It's like almost this fast-paced energy that's outside of yourself that you're
Hmm.
wanting to almost innately chase, like subconsciously, but you're kind
Sure.
of having to refocus and go, all right, how do I take this energy that's outside of myself and just turn it right back inside and not
Yep.
follow almost like it's almost like my dad used to tell me, like when I was growing up, I did a lot of sports, and so one thing I tried was track because I was abnormally fast for a very small human. And
Sure.
um and when I first started, he always said, he goes, don't pay attention to the people around you that are running faster, the path that they're on, nothing. He goes, you just stay in your lane and you focus on how fast you're going. He's like, that's what will get you through to the finish line or just through, right? Any sort of
Right.
circumstance. And it's exactly what you said. It's like people are always focused on, well, okay, I want to get to this goal. But then once you get to that goal, and I think we've all experienced this, you're kind of sitting there going, okay, well, what's the next one? And you don't take the
Right.
time to sit and really appreciate that journey of how you got there. Even as
Yeah.
simple as like getting on a plane and going to a destination, like, yeah, being on a plane is boring, but like you actually have all this time to yourself to
Hmm.
do some things that you maybe didn't get a chance to do otherwise, maybe at home. And you're just so focused on when can I get there? When can I get there? But it's those little very, very small moments in between is what like where the magic happens, I think, with reconnecting to yourself and just staying authentic to who you are. Authentic, yeah.
Right.
So
I
yeah.
know it's become one of those terms already, but it doesn't mean that it's not something to seek out. And I think finding finding who you are, because I do think that there's an authenticity that each person is born with. If you spend time around kids, they're before they've put on all these filters and before they've been assimilated into a culture fully, or before been told what an adult is, they have their own personality, something they were born with, and that I consider that an essence that runs through all the filters of ego we layer on as we go. But we can start pushing that essence through these things that are valued by society rather than us,
Mm.
and so you start to lose sight of that. So I do think there's an essence of who we are that we're born with, because people will tell you, you can change your personality, you can change, these things are kind of fluid, you got to pretend to be the person you want to be. So I consider personality and your skill set, all these things that are changeable, aren't real. So
Mm.
what's underneath all of that essence? And so how can you best program the ego in a way that it streamlines the journey that essence has to make into reality? You know, you can't look at the ego as the enemy, because you can't get rid of it. It's
Mm.
how you're here. It's your interface with reality. Without it, you'd be, Nick Burkowski said, if you're all spirit, you go mad.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't be all spirit and be here and be human. You have to learn how to work with your ego, and learn what society has programmed it as and what you would like it to be programmed as. And that takes time to understand and remember who you are, who you were born as, And, I consider each person kind of as two individuals. There's the human that's born with the DNA and everything we get from our parents, that kind of our characteristics and our personality at the core. And then there's some kind of divine spark that makes us
Mm.
alive. We're both of those things. If you identify heavily with the divinity, you can be a monk, you can be a bliss junkie, and
Yeah.
hang in that zone and kind of sacrifice your humanity and pull yourself away from society if that's what you want to do. Most of us don't have that luxury.
Mm.
Or you can identify heavily with your humanity and become what society wants you to be and sacrifice your divinity. So I think that's that middle path where you have to learn to dance in between the special world and the real and the physical world.
Yeah.
You're both you're fully human and fully divinity. And finding a way to mesh those, I think, is the real challenge of being human. We're Homo sapiens sapiens, the one who knows that knows he knows. And so we're consciously aware, but we're also aware that we're consciously aware.
Mm.
And so it's tricky. We can get in our own head. It's like being in a head, in a head, in a head. And you
Yeah.
can build these dreams within dreams. And to get through all that crap takes time, and to get back to the essence of who you are. So I'm working on some things to get into that and how to practically approach that for people, how to cut through the clutter and recognize that you've always been who you are, and there are signs of that person in the things that you pursue, in the things that you love, kind of a common thread that
Mm.
you can kind of dig out. And I guess that's, you could look at it as like a past life regression in your own lifetime,
I was gonna
looking into your,
ask you, yeah. I was gonna ask
yeah, looking
you.
into your own past as like a data bank of experiences, and but trying to not look at it from the victimhood mentality where all these things happen to you, but from the perspective of I came here on purpose for these experiences. What are these experiences trying to tell me? Like, what is the story
Mm.
for me? What's my story?
There's
You
so, oh
know,
my gosh. First of all, sometimes you say things and I'm thinking them and I'm like, no, that's it. Like, there's no way. And then you say it and then I'm like, the fuck.
right?
But not like not in a bad way. I'm just sitting there going, I'm like, it's nice though, because like we're so okay, there's so much in there. It's like it's almost like you're so prophetic in the way that you say things. And there's so much meaning just in like each sentence. And I don't think you realize it until like
I
you get to
probably don't.
no. Because like there's so many things that you're saying where I'm just sitting there going, holy shit. Like that's like really it's really good. But there are so many things that I want to touch on. The first one was first, I like that you said bliss junkie because I feel like there's so many people who do use their spirituality or divinity almost as an identity. Um,
Mhm.
and that's very scary, right? When you have the divine and you have the human, the humanism, maybe that's a word now.
Sure.
When you have the divine and the humanism, it's hard to meet in the middle because the divine will take you and guide you to places that like you're not expecting. And then you have the human, the real world, the 3D.
Right.
And it's tough for I think anyone who's sensitive to the spiritual realm or divinity in any form to kind of go, am I crazy? You know,
Mhm.
because you can feel and sense all these things, especially if you're sensitive. You can feel and sense all these things with your purpose and your inner light and your essence. It's very hard to follow that in a way that's grounded, that makes sense in your 3D. Because as you said, if you just
Oh
follow
yeah.
one, you get lost and you're not here. And I have I have a few friends and people in my life that are very heavy in the divinity and the spiritual realm, but in a sense, it's kind of some form of an addiction because it's taking you so way outside of yourself that you're not able to stay grounded to who you are in this moment as a human being. Because we all have these
Mhm.
essences and pieces of ourselves, like you said, from past lives. I've done past life regression and it was wild.
I
I,
bet.
oh man, it made sense to me. And what was kind of cool is, and we'll touch on that like afterwards. What was cool is I could see pieces of my old self that I have healed and moved on from, and like generational curses, if you will, that I have already broken, that I'm no
Right.
longer living from those past lives. And I think that's something that's always interested me is in each lifetime and with that divinity comes so much almost like homework assignments in a sense. It's like, well, all
Sure.
right, like
Yeah.
you've studied this long for this many lives. So here's the exam in this lifetime, and you're going, oh no, am I gonna am I gonna pass? Am I gonna fail? But I don't think it's about that end goal. I think it's just what you learn along the way and how you connect to yourself. The divinity part of it, we all have it. I just think a lot of people run away from it because they're scared, because it just connects you to who you are. Um,
Hmm.
and when you say essence in my brain, I imagine like this little cute, thin, like white line that we all just kind of have inside of us. And maybe over
Absolutely.
time, it just gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer.
Yeah, it's kind of like I guess that's what I mean by common thread. Like there's evidence of it and if you and this is what I've found with my experience. And I went through something. The best thing I can liken it to was some of Carl Jung's work, The Process of Individuation,
Mm,
where the ego is confronted by a challenge that it doesn't know the answer to. Every way that it chooses is wrong. Every 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 move at the point you're basically cornered at the point where you have to your ego is forced to look at itself and admit that it's not in control. And mine was not a pleasant experience. It wasn't sought after, I guess. I'd always been somebody that kind of searched for answers and got into the crazy stuff, the occult, and studied a lot of things as a younger kid, searching for the truth or the essence of meaning in life. But I kind of veered away from that, and gotten very far away from the essence of who I was. And so Carl Jung talks about this. You can either approach it willingly or it will approach you
mm,
and you're unwilling. And it's a very abrasive experience, because you're confronted with everything that you are, even some of your skill sets and your personality, the people pleaser mentality that I had. All of these were something that I built my essence to go through in order to satisfy the people and the world around me. And you you don't realize what can be taken away from you when you approach this, and you don't realize how much you've built, how much of yourself is not you, but it's a personality, a persona, a mask that you put on. So I mean I went I've always been good with my hands. It's funny, I've lost some of my dexterity and ability to do some things because that skill set was associated heavily with that particular personality.
mm,
And as I approached this thing, it all went away. Um, and I was forced to discover who I was behind all of it. And I had some crazy experiences in my head, which I think, everything's in our head.
mm,
But I was surprised at the depth of my psyche, my own psyche, the depth that we carry. People will tell you that the body is the subconscious and that most of the intelligence that we have is stored in there. And if you can bypass the logical thinking mind that makes sense of the physical world, which I think is what happened, your intuition and all your programming, you not just peek behind the veil, you rip the veil down,
mm,
and all of this information comes out. And I had experiences where I have some Native American heritage in my bloodline, and it sounds crazy, but I could feel it. Like I could feel the almost like memories of it.
mm,
And these were like visceral somatic experiences, and trying to make sense of that in the context of whatever environment you're currently in, like those two worlds start to really collide. like
Mm.
the physical world and the intuitive world. And the depth of what we carry with us is just, if you think about DNA itself, is just a compounding of evolution and mutations and all of your heritage brought up to this point, and it's all stored inside of you, and you have access to it. And Jordan Peterson even talks about this, is like you can turn aspects of your DNA on and off
Mm.
based on, your willingness to go inside and discover who you are. I don't know if there's a willing is if there's a way to willingly do it, or because that hasn't been my experience. It was kind of forced upon me.
Yeah.
um, but there's so much depth. But my whole point is that there is a common thread of who you are, and it's the culmination of who you've been through your ancestors and potentially past lives.
Yeah.
It's this. So you're dealt a hand in a way that you can't change. And that's what I think is authentic, is that you are dealt a hand, and you can change aspects of how you express that hand through your personality and layers of ego and those things. You do have control of that, but there is a core hand that you're dealt, that if you discover it, you can play it to the best of your ability, but you can't change it.
Mm.
Like, you're
Yeah.
born with something that's unchangeable, and that's hard for people to wrap their head around. It's hard for me, because I want to say who I am,
Yeah.
you know, but I have to admit that there's parts of me that are just that they're better well utilized if I let them be what they are.
Yeah, it's like I've been learning more about that lately. It's the art of just surrendering to your purpose. Um,
Right,
because we all have one. I think sometimes we fight it because we think and know that, all right, we want to carve this path of our lives that we feel we are owed, right? We're like, I want to make my life to be this way. Sometimes though, that's not always what's meant for you. And I think
right.
people have a hard time with understanding. So I think there's a lot to say, but I think that's
Sure.
why a lot of people run away from believing in God or the divine or any sort of spirituality, because they want to understand and think that they have some form of control with every single thing that happens in their life, free will. Um,
Right.
but unfortunately, if you were to really stop and think about it, because I was thinking about this lately, there are so many very small moments in your life where if you had taken the wrong turn, if you had stayed in the wrong relationship, if you had done whatever it might be, stayed in the same job, you wouldn't be where you are now. Um, and it wouldn't have taken you to where you're meant to be. I think that space between where we're meant to be and where people want to be is something that everyone has a very hard time, like a very hard time understanding that you do have to kind of surrender and let your purpose take over. A really cool mentor of mine that kind of helps me with like some of these spiritual aspects. And for me, um, I feel very much like my purpose is driven through relationships with people that I meet. It's not always self. It's like I will meet someone or date someone or be in a relationship with someone that is trying to teach me something that I either need to break, like an old generational curse or situation that I don't want to relive,
Right.
or something about myself that propels me further into who I actually am. Um,
Right.
as a means to challenge me, which is it's very intense. I would say, it's good and bad, right? Because people are our mirrors. But it's interesting because you have all these past life connections, and everyone comes into your life for a reason. It's not an accident. Um,
No.
and we're all kind of connected by this one thread. So you've had some sort of past life interaction with whoever. Um,
Right.
and they're either there to help teach you something, I think, or well, I don't know. Yeah, that's it. They're just they're there to help teach you something about yourself. Um,
Usually,
yeah,
or they're there to learn from you, and I've had to accept that also.
yeah, and that's hard to accept sometimes. Yeah.
Especially if you're sensitive and an overthinker, and you seek meaning in every experience, which is hugely beneficial
Hmm.
if you can view failed relationships as and find the silver lining in them, which I think I tend to do. but also recognize when you're providing an opportunity for someone else to find a silver lining.
Mm.
I think, and sometimes you get into those kind of relationships. If you've made it far enough, if you learn far enough, a lot of times those relationships are very short lived,
Yeah.
and they got the lesson. You figured out that this isn't the person that has a long lasting place in your life, and you move on. I think that gets easier as you get older to recognize when the job is done, kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
and you stop clinging and stop seeking that outside validation for your own sake. you know but yeah, it's most of the time there's always something to learn, and sometimes people learn more from you than you learn from them as you kind of advance through life.
Yeah. And I think there's always, I think you meet a soul counterpart or whatever, whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
when you're on the same frequency. And then
Hmm.
one of you starts growing and the other one either catches up, or if they don't, then they
Right.
naturally just kind of fall out of your life. And you kind of stop and think like, okay, you have all these chances to have, this meaningful relationship. It's up to, can't do the work for someone either,
You
which is
can't.
which is what I've come to realize when you are more in this divine aspect, and you have that balance. It's tough to, you can't tell the other person, hey, I need you to learn your, can you learn your stuff so we can continue? You can't do that,
Right.
so
You can't.
no, that's even with friendships too.
It
um
is.
yeah.
Yeah. The universe will, I look at it like the universe will use you to give them an opportunity to
Yes.
learn it.
Yeah.
But you can share with them as much as you can, and it will help, but it doesn't mean that you stay in there and help them until they've made it. No.
Mm.
You give them the opportunity, a different perspective, something, a way to see things in a new light. But that's really maybe all you're there for, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's all the other people have come in for. But when you meet somebody that's right on your level, depending on where you are, it can turn into a pretty toxic codependent thing
Hmm.
if you're on the same level and it feels like a soulmate level, but you're in a toxic space yourself. And
Yeah.
those are the bonds that can either catapult you or bury you.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I'd say I've had like maybe three of those, and they always catapulted me forwards. But
Hmm.
I think there's always a difference, though, is what I'm finding and realizing. Like, some people are just, and I'm not putting myself on a pedestal at all, but there's some people who take that and they either let it bury them or catapult them. It's that space, it's that same space that's in between, where not a lot of
Hmm.
people allow it to have them catapult them forwards. Instead, they kind of almost just use it in that, almost that victimhood mentality, and they let it take them
Yeah.
under. And it's hard. But I think for every person, there's always a different moment that clicks in your head. And I want to get your take on this, but I think it's, in my opinion, I think it has to do with, if you had to endure a lot of suffering earlier in life, it's almost like when these situations, people, places, whatever it might be, come along, it's almost like you're quicker to go, how can I shift this?
Hmm.
How can I alchemize it? How can I use this experience to take me to where I'm meant to be? Not avoiding
Right.
emotions or avoiding the experience itself, just, all right, how do I move through? And I wonder, for you, like, I'm sure you've been through experiences like that. What has been like the mental moment for you where you sit there and you go, okay, I have
Right.
two choices.
Yeah. I think it was something because as a kid I was highly sensitive, and the way that I navigated that was to kind of put blinders on very early before I even made the decision. It was just kind of, a young age. I was shy, didn't say a whole lot, exceptionally good at sports, but that was kind of the only thing that I stood out in. Otherwise, I kind of created my own little world to feel safe in. But I think doing that, being sensitive without even knowing that I was navigating it by staying positive, I think it just kind of it became the way that I navigated things naturally. It's always kept me focusing on a further goal. I guess as a young kid, I was like, I just assumed I was going to do great things. Like, I think we all do at some
Yeah.
point. Mine just never went away. And I think having have that sight of something further away, always having something further away, whether I'm acting on it or not, the experiences that come into my life were just automatically, I assumed that there was some lesson in there, you know, because the goal was far enough away that if I let those things not be a lesson, then the goal disappears, or
Mm.
the ideal the ideal lifestyle disappears. That's not to say that I haven't been derailed. That's kind of the derailment was what led to this whole experience I had last year, where I succumbed heavily to the victimhood mentality. But it was because my subconscious programming was reaching its limit of effectiveness, I
Mm.
guess. That old way of continuing to see the big idea or big goal without acting on it. My two worlds had kind of divided. My ideal self was still in the conscious mind, but my subconscious programming, my act that caused me to act, was not headed in that direction any longer. And so I kept hitting this glass ceiling. And I think you have to kind of get that's kind of rock bottom, I think, is what that
Mm.
is you hit the end of your programming, and then you have to reevaluate. But I think having grown up with always seeing the silver lining, it was not easier for me, but the only effective way I knew to get myself out of the hole that I dug was to find a glimmer of hope, or a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, even if I couldn't see it. I just had to assume it was there. And I think that's what faith is. I look at that as an opportunity to develop having faith rather than having practical evidence that I should move forward.
Yeah.
Um, and I think just being delusionally optimistic sometimes is the only way,
Yes.
just understanding that, because I was at a low point that I'll never be able to communicate with anybody effectively, I don't think, because experience was so internal and so devastating to who I thought I was, and painful. But if I can dig out of that based on and have no evidence to have a reason to, except for that blind faith that there's another way out. And if that's a message for somebody today, is just like, delude yourself into believing there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and then there will be.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's what it is. It's just this stupid faith that you have a way out, and you have no evidence for it. And I think learning to build a mentality like that, you start to understand how much control you do have over your experience here. Because if you were to succumb to the victimhood and really just base your perspective on the evidence in front of you, you will stay in that prison.
Mm.
You will. You'll never escape it. But by seeing that there is a light, even when you have no evidence of it, you create the light. And that's what I figured out, is like, holy shit, I'm I I'm in control of what I see the world as. And that's like, seeing is believing, or believing is seeing.
Yeah.
Which one would you prefer?
Mm. Yeah. Well, perception is everything, right? Perception of yourself,
Oh, 100%.
your experiences. It shows you how you show up, and how you
Mm-hmm.
choose not to show up. I think like I had the exact same. I got chills when you said that, because I was like, now I've been there so many times where you hit this bottom and you don't see a light at first, but you said it so well. You have to create the light. If you don't create it, it's not going to be there to begin with.
Right.
And then there's not going to be any pathway for you to go. Then it's just like you're going to stay blind to the circumstances that you're in if you allow yourself to do that and to stay in that mindset.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been there many, many times, and I think I preach that so much with people. It's like no matter what circumstance you're in, you have the power to shape how you perceive your situation, no matter like how dark and how terrible it might be and how lonely you're feeling. At the same time, your thoughts are in your control. Your reality and how you see it is in your control. You may not be able to control how you get to where you want to be. That's fine. But at least take the steps, like
Right.
at least understand that you can take a step. You don't have to stay stuck. I think a lot of people when they're stuck, they think, "Okay, I'm stuck." They don't think, "Let me just take one step." They're going, "How can I sprint?" It's like you won't be able to sprint.
Mm-mm.
Because you're not meant to. You're meant to just take one step and then the next and then the next. And then eventually you're through the tunnel, you're out the other side, and then you can get to where you need to get to next. I think sometimes when we're in that dark place, it's easy to think, how do I speed through this? Um,
Yeah.
but it's in those very small pockets of the in-between spaces is what I will call them now. The pockets of the in-between spaces where it's up to you to figure out how you want to do that. Like not it's never going to be given to you. You have to create it yourself.
You do.
So yeah.
Escaping, it's funny because you got to be careful what you ask for.
Mm,
If you want, if you truly want to escape victimhood and feel like you're in control of your experience here, you you're going to lose a lot of your identity that's associated with the world happening to you,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
you are not almost never prepared for the amount of responsibility you're going to take on to escape that victimhood, to become the hero of your own life, as people like to call it, like to become the conductor. This serious amount of responsibility. You're going to feel overwhelmed by the control that you're starting to garner, and with all these million moving parts. And how do you interact with people? How do you navigate your sensitivity, but also be sensitive to them?
Mm,
How do you, and because as you go down this path of escaping that victimhood mentality, the world is still, many people are still stuck in that victimhood. And when you start to change, you start to highlight that they're stuck.
yeah.
And so that fear of being unaccepted is actually quite rational, because you will be pushed out into the desert, because you're a threat to their ego, their victimhood.
Mm,
And that's something that it's people, I don't think a lot of people talk about, is the fear of standing out is absolutely validated, because you are going to stand out, and you just might be ridiculed. And
yeah.
you have to find something inside yourself that you trust enough to keep going when everyone is telling you, sometimes aggressively, that you're going the wrong way. And but if you look at society, especially the United States, we are we are buried in victimhood.
Yeah. Well,
Every,
because people
you
want
know,
to stay stuck. Yeah.
yeah, it's we want, because there's something about being human that you want to be coddled.
Mm,
You want to be taken care of. And so we build these systems that do everything for us, and then we blame those systems when they do the things for us that we don't like. And so it's this constant battle of victimhood and trying to take control. It's and so I tend to grow in silence more so. I don't broadcast to anybody in my immediate circle, even family sometimes, that the steps that I'm taking, or the epiphanies that I'm
mm,
having, because whether they're in our tight family circle or not, humans are humans, and they might try to, you know, implement their advice and their direction onto you to in order to validate their experience.
yeah.
You know,
I've had
and
a lot of that. lately. Just funny you're saying, well, no, it's not funny anymore. It's just at this point, it's
Right.
no, but I resonate with that because there's with the fear. I think, like you said, with the fear of being seen, there's that fear of being ridiculed, but you can't be, otherwise you can't be seen. You're gonna be hiding the whole time. Um,
Exactly.
and the
Yeah.
light, like the light that's inside of you, is gonna irritate the lack of a light in someone else.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I've experienced that so much. I feel even even with my platform a little bit, it's funny. I saw this video on social media somewhere where someone said like, all the people that watch what you're doing, but they're not celebrating you, they're not supporting you, they're not like sharing your stuff in any way to help support you. They secretly just don't want you to like they don't want you to succeed, which is as sad as that is. There are so many
Right.
people that to your face will say I like what you're doing or say what you're doing is great, but then in the background you're thinking, okay, well, how come he didn't, you're not supporting me in any way, shape, or form, so then
Right.
are you? And they're not. And I'm the same. I'm very quiet with what I'm doing and how I'm growing because everything is very internal for me as well. And I understand that because I think it's tough to tell people like all these epiphanies you're having because they're not going to completely understand where you're coming from because they haven't lived your life. And, um, which is great, it's a good thing. And it's good to share those epiphanies sometimes because someone might relate to it. But in my immediate circle and family too, that's the same thing. I got into an argument with my dad actually like a week
Mhm.
ago because we don't like I don't live with him.
Mhm.
So for him, it's like if you're not in front of my eyes and I'm not seeing everything you're doing, even though I'm in my 30s, like he's like, if I don't have my eyes on you, then I don't know what you're doing and how you're succeeding because I don't see anything.
Sure.
And then it within like the argument that we had, I go, what? I go, Dad, I'll be honest, I don't really have anything to prove to you. I'm not. I'm like, as I don't mean that in a mean way. I go, but I'm doing all these things to better myself and work on myself, not for you, but for me. And if I were to share what I'm doing all the time, that would take away from the experience and growth that I'm experiencing within me, because then it would come from a place of validation and almost attention seeking. And it's those people that are the loudest that actually are the most insecure, and the people that are the more quiet ones that are actually very confident because they just kind of shut up and they get on with it and they do what they need to do. Um,
Right.
because we don't, I don't know, I don't need the validation. I don't need someone to tell me, hey, like it'd be nice and it would feel great, because like
Right.
sometimes when you are on your own path of growth, it is isolating, but you shouldn't crave it or need it. Um, and then to kind of like shut my dad up a little bit was, my ego sometimes shows through.
Sure.
I posted one of my tea times on LinkedIn because I was like, yeah, I'm like, I'm not just like sitting around at home doing nothing. I kind of,
Right.
I get my shit going. And then
Right.
afterwards, he messaged me and he was like, I'm wrong. I'm so sorry. Wow, those are amazing. Oh my God. I'm like, thank you. So I just stay
Right.
quiet, quiet, quiet. I do that with everything though. I think I'm known for that. Is my friends
Hmm.
know that when I disappear or they don't hear from me, they understand it's because some sort of transformation is happening and
Right.
it doesn't need to be broadcasted. Um, yeah.
I think, and this is the thing that I've noticed with all, I spent decades reading self-help work and watching videos and trying to get to the truth and find meaning in all these things. And I listen to all of it, but it's very hard to practically apply metaphors or ethereal things. And like you'd mentioned, it's very important what place it comes from.
Yeah.
Right. But what is that like? Can we put a physical thing on it? And I think what's helped me is starting to link like the logical understanding, the practicality with some of these ethereal concepts. So where it comes from, okay, what does that mean? What's it feel like? Okay, well, if it's coming from, let's just call it the soul and the ego. if it's coming from the ego, the evidence is you need outside validation, right? So if you're someone that transforms in private, most likely your intention is coming from something deeper,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't need the outside validation. You're bypassing the ego in a way. And so it's funny when you start to change and transform from a soul level,
Mm-hmm.
and the people around you are coming from their ego perspective, so they want evidence.
Yes.
So your soul is trying to show them their ego evidence. So,
Yeah.
and at that point, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like I don't need to validate your ego by showing you evidence of my soul's evolution.
Mm.
You know, and I think anybody, like you said, the loudness and the look at me mentality, that's pure ego.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's an energetic understanding when you show up and you're quiet and you look like you shouldn't be quiet, right? You have this
Yes.
presence that says, I'm something, but I'm not speaking about it. That really pisses egotistical people off.
Does. It irritates them, it pushes them. And I've noticed, like, as my soul evolves, how people treat me shifts and changes, which is very interesting to me.
Right,
You start to notice, it's interesting, you start to notice a little bit more of their intentions. They may not be bad or good, it's not how,
right,
it's just what they're conscious and their subconscious where they're at. I notice if I'm in a more like feminine energy and I'm more quiet and laid back, I'm a hell of a lot more magnetic. And then I start to
mm-hmm.
watch the people around me and I'm going, how are each one of these people treating me? You start to notice who craves that energy and who wants it
Right.
for themselves. You start to
Who's
notice
threatened by it?
yeah, you start to notice who is threatened by it, yep, and then they try to bring your frequency back down so that they feel more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with you.
Yep.
Um, and it's wild to me just like how much evolution you see within yourself and in your circle. I think I used to get really hard on myself for not keeping the same friends my whole life.
Right.
And I mean, I have a couple that like childhood friends that will never leave me because they're probably just meant to be in my life forever. But they accept my change. That's the difference. They celebrate it, they support it. Then you have almost like all these very surface level connections in your life that will just innately start to fall away.
Right.
You don't plant and water it and feed it as much because for some reason you don't feel lit up to. Someone said that
Mm-hmm.
to me lately. One of my girlfriends she's super into human design, and I'm like, I make fun of her. I go, It's not the
Yeah.
end all be all. It's just a thing." And
I've
she's like,
just heard about this recently. Yeah.
"Yeah, it's interesting to me because it highlights how you energetically operate." So I'm like, okay, I'm taking it with that level. I'm not gonna take it to the extreme of like, this is my identity. Um, and she will probably listen to this podcast, but she she had told me one time that the way that your energy operates is based off of your soul's evolution, and the human design kind of just mirrors that, right? Shows you how you interact with each human being. And we talk often about how some of the people in our lives, their true intentions don't show up until your energy starts changing,
Mm-hmm.
which is very wild to me. I was gonna go somewhere else with that, but I forgot. Maybe I wasn't meant to. But
Speaking again from where it comes from, when you are having more what Jung would call direct experiences with reality, like your identity, your primary identity is more associated with your soul than your ego.
mm,
You start to see things more clearly, you know, because you're not seeing from the perspective and all the programming of your ego. You're not seeing someone else's ego from your ego. You're seeing their ego from your soul. So
yeah,
you can it in a way, and I've talked to a few people about this, it's easier to navigate reality and navigate people. A lot of it's just like so obvious what their intentions are.
hmm,
And they think it's quite hidden. It's not.
yeah,
Not if you're having a direct experience with or a more direct experience with reality, and that's a concept that I've kind of played around with, is where does your primary identity lie?
Mm,
Is it somewhere in the ego, or is it somewhere deeper in the soul, if you want to call it that?
yeah.
That determines how you experience reality vastly.
Yeah. How's that experience been for you just recently? Like, are there any examples of ways that you've experienced that have left you, having these epiphanies about it?
Yeah, I think, well, it can be, especially if you don't know what's happening as you go through a transition of experiencing reality more directly. Um, and again, what I mean by that is starting to shed some of the egotistical programming. I don't, and I say ego as it has like a negative connotation. I don't want it to.
Mhm.
I look at it like it's the software that our hardware runs on, and it's the way we interface. But a lot of it's inaccurate through social programming and the way we're brought up. But if you can start to bypass that, your body will have physical response because it's now more sensitive because it's closer to reality,
Mm,
right? So your somatic experience starts to heighten, and so grounding becomes exceptionally important, um, because you'll start feeling every energetic change and shift, and it can be hard to be around a lot of people, because you're dealing, essentially each individual is a universe of complexity. And
mhm.
so you get into a group of 10 or 15 people, and if you're really just starting to approach this kind of shedding of ego programming, each individual is going to be overwhelming. You'll feel it somatically sometimes, and their energy can overtake yours if you don't know how to control it yet. The best way I've learned to navigate it is isolation. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
the best way, but sometimes it's the only answer. It's like
Yeah.
a cacophony of noise, energetic noise, that you have to separate yourself from, but also venture back out into, to learn how to adapt to it.
That's what
And
I remember what I was gonna you helped me. I was like, I
go
didn't
ahead. Yeah.
no the importance the importance of the somatic experience energetically and connecting to yourself and your body is huge. Because as highly sensitive people that are going through this experience, which I think I'd argue to say that a lot of people have the sensitivity, they just
Yeah.
they don't lean into it. But when you do, it can be really hard to distinct your energy from theirs. I think that's what you're getting at too, is your de-shedding and deprogramming can get overtaken by people's energy who aren't there. They're not on that level. And then,
Right.
to take it back to what we said, then all of a sudden you're falling back into these identities of people that's not you. You can absorb their identity and who they are and their experiences, and then all of a sudden you're no longer you. You're
Oh
pieces of
yeah.
them, and it's I the isolation that you talk about. My friends and family make fun of me, but I call it a cocoon of silence.
Yeah.
I have a focus mode set up on my phone called Cocoon of Silence. It turns off everything except for family, um, and like emergency calls. Like all they can do is call me if it's an emergency. So I have it set up where like I don't see anything. My phone goes in a drawer for an entire day. And I just reconnect to myself, and I don't speak to anyone because, like you said, I think like a lot of people have very overpowering energies without knowing it, because they're operating from that ego standpoint. And when you're in the spiritual de-shedding, it's almost like a baby snail without a shell. You're very sensitive to
Absolutely.
your out.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you can feel everything, you can sense everything, and it may not even be your own emotions. And grounding is so important. And then even as simple as like this is slightly witchy, but who cares? And a little woo woo. But even like zipping up your energy, like before I leave the house, I
Sure.
consciously go, all right. I'm like, I'm just gonna zip up my energy so that I'm not taking on stuff and shit that's like not mine. So
Right.
I'm able to operate from a place of my own authenticity and stay grounded. Um, which is wild that we're talking about this because before we even got on here, I said, I was like, I feel all this energy outside of myself and I feel like I need to come back inside. And I think that might be what it is. It's too much external stimuli can take you away from yourself when you're sensitive, and it's very like extremely important. So how do you ground yourself? I think we talked about this a little bit, but if it's always different for everyone.
Sure. Um, I have to make logical sense of every ethereal concept. Otherwise, I'll go completely crazy. It's very hard for me to like dance in the what Campbell calls like the special world for too
Mm.
long before I lose my shit. So I make it quite literal. I take my shoes and socks off and I go walk barefoot.
Mm.
I make the literal grounding of my unit, my body. I make that the thing because that's tangible. There's scientific evidence for it, and so my programming is like that's real,
Yeah.
and so that feels real to me to ground that way. Being outside, anything to do with the natural world, the rhythms that can't be changed, the sun rises and sets. We're designed to work with that rhythm, and we have been. And there's more and more evidence that shows, looking at low level sunlight in the evening and this in the morning, like sets our circadian rhythm, sets our hormones, lowers cortisol levels. Like
Mhm.
I do all of that very practical stuff if I'm feeling that's like my first go to. Because if I'm not hitting those very realistic basics, then I can get spun out into trying to think my way out of it through the ethereal.
Mm.
And so I just try to hit those very practical basics. But yeah, like zipping up your energy. The truth is that we can visualize it anyway because we create our own reality. So if that
Mm.
works for you, that's real to you.
Mhm.
And so whatever our subconscious knows as real, which we can program it through repetition, then it will adapt to. It will view that visualization as real and it will work,
Yeah.
and so for me, I guess I like more tangible physical contact with the ground. That
Yeah.
helps me. Eating is actually very grounding for me. It's like it's bringing the outside world into the body essentially,
Mm.
and so it's a you're associating grounding with eating. You're taking part of the earth or something that grows on the earth, and you're ingesting it.
Yeah.
It's quite a grounding thing. Um, that's why I think fasting can produce spiritual experiences because you're ungrounding,
Yeah,
you know,
that's true. That's
you
very
know.
true. I
And so I just try to get really practical about it most of the time.
that's sorry, I almost interrupted you. I get excited and then
No, you're good.
I um I definitely have some form of ADHD because like I
Oh, me
get
too. Yeah.
like you get inspired by something that someone says and you're like, I have to share this now or I'm gonna forget about it, and then you forget about it and you're like, um I think they're all, it's like grounding is technically sensual, right? Sensuality is your senses, is what I've come to understand and learn. I think there's a very interesting difference in what people consider sensual, but sensual is just connecting to you, connecting to your senses, connecting to your physical body.
Right.
And that is grounding, which is so true. And eating, yes, and I think to take it a step further, it's like eating the right foods. It's just like the basics, if you don't, biohacking was so popular for a long time for mental health,
Right.
but actually there's so much like science backed behind it. Um, that makes sense. It's like you're doing these things that actually reconnect you to your human roots and ancestry as like human beings in development that are supposed to
100%.
like help you be more you, even as simple as like taping your mouth shut at night. It sounds silly,
Right.
but I do it because I have less anxiety, I sleep more, and there's a billion other great benefits to it, but it's because we're not supposed to be breathing out of our mouths. Um,
Hmm.
that's just like a simple, that simple thing. And then hot and cold exposure, right? Ice baths and saunas are like the new thing.
Right.
But again, if you think back to like human evolution and how we evolved, it's they were essentially using the tools around them in nature to help them feel that way. It wasn't conscious probably for them. It was probably very just
Right.
somatic. But at the same time, it's like that connection to your body and your spirituality is based off of the humanism, that you're in with that spirituality. That spirituality is in you, in your DNA, like you said, so that you can use it to feel more you
Absolutely.
feel more human, but allow like that divinity to guide you into that experience. So
Yeah. Yeah. I see it a lot like, I mean, we're electrical beings.
yeah.
It's how we function. It's how we move. That's how our brain works. Our heart center produces an electric field, and so by literally like if you're wearing shoes and socks and you're not touching bare ground for long enough, and you're a sensitive person, you become like a live wire,
Yeah.
and you become like an unsheathed wire that can just sense all of this energy around you all the time. And that's where the somatic experience for me gets overwhelming. It's like you can hear the buzz, almost like an electrical buzz. And so by grounding yourself, you're connecting to the earth your body was born from. Like it's not even separate from you. It's what you're
Yeah.
made of, and you can be a more productive conduit for spirit, or however you want to view it. But you have to be connected to something. And like you were saying, like how long did humans go without wearing shoes?
Mm.
How long were they not connected to the earth, but part of it?
Yeah.
And now we've deviated so far in the name of progress, and we find ourselves missing the things that we were always supposed to have. And so like the hot and cold therapy and the sunlight therapy, all these devices that have been kind of worked back into society to help maintain the direction that society is going, but also still hit all of those basic necessities.
Yeah.
I'm all for biohacking and like finding devices that work, but I also would just prefer to go the fuck outside,
Yeah.
like like, and bypass all of it. Like I think at this point, if there's any main driver or main goal for me in life, it is to live as close to a natural rhythm
Mm.
as possible. Like produce during the day and receive at night.
Yeah.
Like it's an ebb and flow. Every day is a repeated cycle of a longer cycle. And I feel the most in tune when I follow the cycle that is already there.
Mm.
You know, rise with the sun if I can, or a little bit above. Usually I'm up by 5, but and go to bed around 7 or 8. Now that sounds like old man territory, but the truth is like it feels the most natural, and it keeps me the most even keel, the most mentally healthy. Like I think because society will demand of you something that is completely different than your body is designed to do.
Mm.
And so we keep kind of trying to throw these things back in to maintain that unnatural rhythm, when all we really need to do is work on how can I live closer to the natural rhythm.
Mm.
And but that's hard because they have careers, and some people work night shifts, and it's like we've built this prison system that's very hard to escape. I try to connect my own experience to the words that I use,
Mm.
and I try to make it in a way that people understand it, because otherwise what the hell am I doing?
Mm.
I need people to find value in it, because I've found value in so many things that were written and said before, that I want to feel like I'm contributing to that in some fashion. So
Yeah. So, because we can just keep going, Austin and I, and we want to make sure that you have a chance to like reach out to him and get to know him a little bit better, I'm going to tell him where you can find him on Twitter, X, whatever it's called.
yeah, thank you. If anybody's interested, you can find me at Austin K Wentling. That's AUSTIN KWENTLING. Yeah, write my musings and hopefully some helpful information on there. So yeah, reach out.
Well, thank you for coming on. This was,
Thank you for having me.
yeah, of course. I love this conversation so much. It was really, really good.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you ever want to chat more about anything that this podcast is about, you know where to find me. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and good old TikTok. And be sure to stay tuned for my Tea Time with Sabby episodes. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube or whatever streaming platform you happen to be listening to this on, I encourage you to follow, like, subscribe, and rate this so that it pushes it out to whoever else might need it.